I'm sure you do know. This is Tony Campolo. He's going to talk about The Simpsons and a Christian college student. Tony was a professor at University of Pennsylvania for 10 years, and now he's a professor of sociology at Eastern University, just outside of Philadelphia. He's also in charge of a missionary organization. He's here because partly he wrote the introduction for the book, The Gospel According to The Simpsons, and in that kind of confessed his enjoyment of The Simpsons, and it's that enjoyment that we want him to talk about. Tony Campolo said, I find in The Simpsons a family that reflects my own religious life, something like that. And so we're very thankful for Tony Campolo to come here today. He has lots of speeches all over the country, and we're very happy to have him. So, Tony Campolo.
This is not my usual thing. I have to tell you that right off the bat, number one. Number two is, I may not be as expert on the Simpson episodes as you are. There's hundreds of them, and I haven't seen but a handful compared to how many are available. Some of my friends who are really experts on this thing have seen all of them and have reviewed all of them and have critiqued all of them. I've only critiqued some of them, number one. And I have critiqued the ones that I think are pertinent to a Christian community. See, now, Bart would have a cow at that. So that's the first thing. The thing that I find about The Simpsons is it's very much a Rorschach test, that people tend to find in The Simpsons, to a large degree, what they bring to it. They read into it. They find things in it. There are people who are totally repulsed by the show, feeling that it is contrary to everything Christian, and that it is, in fact, something that Christians should avoid, condemn, it ought to be off the air. I don't feel that way. Let me just say that The Simpsons, of course, this cartoon series, is a satire on our society. And we need to talk about that. It's actually a satire on cartoons. It's a satire on the culture. It's a satire on television. I just think of the way in which they work in things that are part of the pop culture, so that if you're not really in tune with what's going on in the world round about you, you couldn't figure out what the shows are all about. For instance, there's one show called The Streetcar Named Marge, in which Marge plays Blanche Dubois in the Tennessee Williams play. I mean, you got to know Tennessee Williams, you got to know The Streetcar Named Desire, and Ned Flanders plays her opposite, which is a very interesting thing, the immoral man, Ned Flanders, needing a babysitter. While she goes to rehearsals, she puts Maggie in, quote unquote, the Ayn Rand School for Tots. Once again, you'd have to know something about Ayn Rand and her whole philosophical orientation that selfishness is a virtue and that we ought to assert ourselves in this Nietzschean individualism. It's run by the director's sister, who is an authoritarian, Hitler-like person. And she enrages Maggie, little baby Maggie, by taking away her pacifier, takes away the pacifiers of all the kids, says, you're not going to chew on pacifiers in the Ayn Rand School for Tots. Well, what happens is Maggie organizes all the babies in a reclamation mission. They rebel. And as they rebel and they fight back and get their pacifiers back, the music in the background is the music from the movie The Great Escape. Once again, you see how much you have to know to really come to this episode. You'd have to know Tennessee Williams's play. You would have to know something about Ayn Rand. You'd have to have seen the movie The Great Escape. You would have to be conscious of the music background. All of this is part of it. Then when Homer comes to pick up Maggie, who now has her pacifier back, as do all the other babies, the children are lined up in rows, and they are all sucking on their pacifiers rhythmically in a scene that very much approximates Hitchcock's movie, The Birds. I don't know how many of you have seen The Birds, where all the birds line up and they're chirping and that threatening thing. Well, all these kids, I mean, you can't look at that and watch it without sensing that this is a Hitchcock replication. Once again, it requires that you come to the shows with a pretty high level of sophistication. A lot of people have said that this show should be forbidden for Christians to watch because it is anti-family. I can't think of anything that is further from the truth. It is the most pro-family show that I've ever seen on television in recent years. Consider the fact that almost every show on television now does not have an intact family. It's one parent. They're almost all single-parent families. Or it's a gay couple, or it's a divorced couple, or it's something. But it's not what you have in The Simpsons. A loyal husband and wife, really loyal. As a matter of fact, if you trace The Simpsons over a period of time, you find that both of them are put into situations where they could have extramarital affairs. Both of them are very tempted to do it. Marge, for instance, upon her birthday, receives for a present from Homer a bowling ball with his name inscribed on it. And that kind of is the last straw. And she hooks up with this guy who quotes Shakespeare and knows poetry and is sensitive and empathetic and caring. So here she is married to this clod who drinks beer, eats donuts, and bowls, and she's suddenly connected with this guy who's sensitive and caring, and he wants to have an affair with her. And she says no. Very turned on, very tempted. But in the end, her loyalty to her family takes precedence over her own sexual inclinations. The same thing happens with Homer. He's on a business trip with this woman that he's always wanted to have an affair with. He's fantasized about this woman for years. And now the situation is perfect. What's more is, she proposes that they do it. And he's almost ready to go, and he thinks about his kids, and he thinks about his wife, and he knows that life will never be the same if he ever crosses this line. And he leaves because of loyalty to his family. And just to give you a sense of realness, he leaves, shuts the door, and you're sitting there watching this, and all of a sudden the door opens again, and he says, "You mean you would have gone all the way?" And she says, "Yes." And he goes, "Ooh," and runs down the hall. I mean, this idea of fleeing temptation, that is not one of those pious bits that you sometimes get in religious circles. I never had the thought, I never had the temptation, I never had the inclination to ever be unfaithful. Oh no. Homer and Marge are real people. They get turned on, they do get the temptations, but they are so committed to the family that in the end they cannot put loyalty to the family below their interest in having sexual gratification. Both Lisa and Bart, and incidentally, as it says in the introduction of the book, this book really fascinates me because I have two children, and my son's name, not an abbreviation, my son's name is Bart, and my daughter's name is Lisa. You know, now, this is very hard to handle when you look like Homer. It's very hard to handle, but that's true. Now, let's just look at the family. The brother and the sister really love each other. I don't know, I just saw an episode the other night. The only time I ever see it, it was on late television in a motel room just before I go to sleep. You know, if something's on at 11:30, I catch one. And there's this incredible scene in which they're playing a hockey game. Any of you see this one? They play a hockey game, and the competition is escalating and escalating and escalating. And finally, at the end of the game, the score is tied 2-2. Bart's team versus Lisa's team. Lisa's the goalkeeper. Bart has the chance for a penalty shot. This is his chance to really do his sister in. And he's going to charge at the net and score and be the hero. She, on the other hand, is bracing herself and is going to knock down the puck, and she knows that she's going to humiliate Bart, and he will never be happy again. And then, as only they do in The Simpsons, there are these flashbacks, and she remembers when he played with her when she was a little baby. And he remembers how nice she was to him on certain occasions, and they get more and more sentimental. And I don't know whether you remember this, but they drop their hockey sticks, and to the booing of the crowd, come out and hug each other. That in the end, that's the end of the show, in the end, love for each other transcends competition and the desire to win and the desire to be heroes. That's a very important lesson for kids to learn, and aware of in an age and a time when competition is in fact playing a very destructive role in the socialization of children. These are very important things. There's a great episode in which the kids go off to school. Bart gets in trouble and ends up in the principal's office, and the principal is going to contact the parents because he's been so bad. Lisa, on the other hand, has had something happen. Somebody steals her corrective shoes while she's in phys ed. And so she's walking around the school barefooted, and they bring her down to the principal's office, and the principal and the school teacher, Mrs. Crabapple, I love the names of people, very, very intent upon seeing what's going on. What kind of parents are these that send a little girl to school without any shoes, and whose boy is such a mess? They must have a dysfunctional home. So they proceed to get the school social worker and go to the house. Well, it so happens that on that day they have put Maggie in a daycare, and Homer and Marge have an appointment at a gym because they got to take off some weight, you know, because of the beer belly that Homer has. And while they're out, these people come. Well, it so happened that it was a really bad day that morning, and everything was messed up in the house. And you know how your house can be totally messed. So they go in and they say, these people are living in a pigsty. These children don't have shoes. The boy is a problem. The social workers and the teachers completely misread the situation, call for the police to come, and they declare Homer and Marge unfit parents and put the children in a foster home. Now, the foster home is Ned Flexer's home next door. Now, it's not Ned Flexer, Ned Flanders, rather. You remember Ned Flanders. He is the ultimate Christian. He's evangelical to the core. He would love Calvin College. He would love it. No, this is where he belongs. He is a Calvinist. He is not Pentecostal. I mean, they're quite specific. He is very Calvinistic. He goes to Promise Keepers. I mean, this is really contemporary stuff. He lives the life. As a matter of fact, Ned Flanders is such a good person. There's one particular line in which they're coming out of church, and Marge says to Homer, do you really believe in heaven and hell? He says, heaven? This is a great line. He says, if everybody in this town was like Ned Flanders, we wouldn't need a heaven because we would already be there. What a wonderful thing to say about a person who's trying to live out the Christian life. Let me just give you a little study that was done by the London Telegraph, which is one of their primary newspapers, one of their national newspapers, when asking the question that is often asked by people, who are the most admired religious leaders of our time? Billy Graham came in fourth. I think the Pope came in third. Mother Teresa came in second. And Ned Flanders came in first. The most admired religious figure in terms of living out the Christian life with consistency, with honesty, with no hypocrisy. Ned Flanders is the ideal Christian. I mean, people, there aren't many shows on television that present Christianity with such a positive image that people would say, that's what a Christian is really like Ned Flanders. What a communication. What, in fact, is being communicated here? I say it's pre-evangelism. I mean, this man is really a paragon of virtue in so many ways. And the way he handles the insults, the humiliations, the ill treatment at the hands of Homer, forgiving, sensitive, caring. And he's no phony either. He has a spiritual crisis in his own life. His wife dies. And upon the death of his wife, he goes through a spiritual crisis. He almost loses his faith. And it's a very painful thing for him. He's about to drift out of the faith completely, and he's in a department store, and he hears them singing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And on the second verse, 'twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. Tears come to his eyes, and his faith is regenerated. Now, I got to tell you, I have seen television evangelists who have said a lot less than that show said about what Christianity is all about. That it's not some phony thing where no problems, no troubles, no trials, no dark times. There are dark times for Ned Flexer, but in the end, something down deep inside appeals to him and lifts him out of the doldrums. Something recalls him to the Christ that he knew in the yesterdays, and he comes forth. But in this particular episode, he becomes the surrogate parent for Bart and Lisa. And he does everything right. He tries to teach them Bible verses. He tries to get them baptized. He finds out they were never baptized. They got a Jew, we got to get you baptized. He's a Calvinist and believes in the, no, it's serious. He goes into covenant theology and points out that, we got to have this covenant with God. I mean, it's really great. In the end, this ideal parent is not as good as a real parent. The social worker who wants to engineer a good environment engineered by social specialists, by sociologists and social workers, is not as good as a real family with a real father and a real mother. He may drink beer, the Bart may be yelling and screaming, but the truth is, better to have a real family than even an excellent surrogate family. An important message to be declared, an important person to be set forth. But when I look at these people, the love that they have for each other is a model of what family ought to be about. At a particular time, Lisa wants a pony. So great is the love of Homer for Lisa that he goes out and takes a second job, working at the Quick E Mart, one of these convenience places. And the guy that's running the place is from India. I mean, they do all the, everything that they can't find one of those places where somebody from America is working it. It's always some foreigner that's working the thing, doing it brilliantly, and he works with him. So it has a very positive view of the family. Incidentally, I want to know that the family, in many respects, is a democratic family. It is not an authoritarian family, obviously. I mean, in this particular family, father does not know best, to say the least. It is not hierarchical. It's not male-dominated. It is, in fact, a totally democratic family. As a matter of fact, the children are given the opportunity to provide good input into family decisions, especially Lisa, who obviously is the brightest of the whole crowd, who comes, she is quite a genius, as you know. As a matter of fact, I think I might even move on to Lisa at this particular point and say there is a I'll wait. I'll go on from the family to the next social institution because I'm a sociologist. So the first thing I want to do is deal with social institutions. And I want to talk about the structure of the family. It looks so dysfunctional when you see it from the outside, but when you really get to it, family loyalty dominates. Family takes precedence over everything. They do what a good family does. Incidentally, as a good Calvinist family, what do they do on Sunday? Every Sunday, go to church. They are in church every Sunday. You will not see a show on television where people go to church as often as they go to church in The Simpsons. So please get this. A family with intense loyalty that goes to church every Sunday, not a bad model for the American society that has forgotten what it means to be loyal in the context of the family. Let's look at religion just a little bit. Lisa is the mainline denominational person. Her religiosity is totally a matter of social morality. There is no spiritual ecstasy in all of this, but she is into all the causes that the National Council of Churches would be into. She is into environmentalism, she is anti-war, she is anti-gun. Incidentally, there's great mockery of politics. I'll get to politics in a minute, but she's into all these causes. She becomes a vegetarian because they take her to the zoo and she pets a little lamb in the children's zoo. They always have a children's section where you can go in and pet the animals, and she pets this sweet little lamb. And then she comes home, and that night they serve up lamb chops to eat. And in her mind, she's making this connection between this sweet little lamb that she hugged and this lamb chop. And she just goes on a moral trip. This is wrong. This is morally wrong. And she becomes a vegetarian. And like most people who make a moral commitment, especially on the political left, they end up with this moral superiority. I mean, if you dealt with people like me on the political sense in which we are tempted to moral superiority, we don't believe in the war. We have a higher morality than that. We don't believe in ruining the environment. We have a higher, and we look down on people. This elitist mindset that emerges in the left is sickening to behold, and indeed Lisa gets caught up in it. And she makes friends with Adu, the guy who runs the convenience store, and it was from India. He too is a vegetarian. Knit up to each other, and they have a little circle of friends that are vegetarians. And then One day she says, isn't it great? The rest of the world ought to know that you can be even healthier if you don't eat meat. If you just confine yourself to vegetables and fruit and grain and berries and cheese. And the guy from India says, cheese? Only to point out, no matter how holy you get, there's always somebody at home humbled by all of this, saying, I don't agree with you, but you're pretty good people. Which is a very important thing, because it's so easy to get caught up in moral crusades and act like the people who don't agree with you, who aren't buying into the lifestyle that your spirituality prescribes, are somehow second-class Christians. Hey, they're good people too. This is a thing that she feels she has to do because she pet the lamb. But she's not going to make it normative for everybody, nor make judgments about other people anymore. That's a very important thing to grasp. Let's talk a little bit about the religion. There's a minister, of course, Reverend Lovejoy. He's an interesting guy, kind of hypocritical in some respects. But in so many ways, he represents a pastor. I was a pastor for a short period of time. I could never handle being a pastor. My problem was I could never resist a good one-liner, and that's not good for a pastor. No, I'm serious. I remember one Sunday, this lady coming out of church said, Reverend, do you know how many grammatical errors you made in the prayer this morning? And before I could catch myself, I said, I wasn't talking to you anyway. Which, I mean, you can see why I would like to, do you understand why I would like the Simpsons? I mean, that is something that Bart Simpson would say. That's his kind of line. And so he kind of relates to where I am. But the minister has a daughter, and she's really a messed up, bad kid. I mean, she is almost a prototype of the rebellious minister's child, the minister's daughter. There's this great scene where she connects with Bart, and actually Jessica Lovejoy becomes his girlfriend. And in almost Nietzschean terms, she says, oh, Bart Simpson, you're really a very bad person. And he says, not really. She interrupts again and says, you're really bad. Don't try to deny it. And that's what I like about you. And he says, yeah, I'm bad to the bone, honey. I'm bad to the bone. This sense of embracing this evil because that's what turns her on. But the pastor has a burnout. Do you know pastors who have had burnouts? Too much work, too many calls, too many hospital visits, too many sermons to prepare, too many committee meetings, and he just becomes emotionally burnt out. I don't know of another television show, Christian or otherwise, that has ever dealt with ministerial burnout and what has to be done. And what has to be done is people in the church have to come forward and start carrying the load for him. And of course, the one that carries the load the most is Marge, who takes on the counseling that he was doing and does a very, very good job, which points out something, that you don't have to be a super pro to be a good counselor. You just have to be a very, very caring person. And Marge is. And he takes, you get the congregation coming to the rescue of the pastor in the burnout. What a beautiful vision of what a church ought to be about. Let me just tell you one little story out of my own life. I was the pastor of this little church over in New Jersey when I was in grad school. I made a few bucks at it over the weekend, and besides that, it was a great experience. And this girl who'd gotten pregnant out of wedlock had never come to church. I visited her many times, especially when she had the baby, but she never came to church. Then one day she appeared and came to see me, and she said, I want my baby done. I'm Baptist. I said, we don't do babies, We wait until they grow up, and then we shove them under the water. We don't do babies. We have this thing called a dedication of children. And she said, okay, that's what I want. I want you to do the dedication thing. Well, I'm in a hurry. See, I'm trying to hold down a job. I'm trying to go to graduate school. And I'm trying to do this church thing all together. I'm going crazy. I did not go over the dedication service carefully. And I'm there at this service. And I'm reading through this thing, and this woman's there with her baby, standing all alone because she doesn't have a husband. And evidently, I didn't realize it because it was the first one I ever did, that the person whose child is being dedicated should have people standing with them. Because there's a part in the ceremony where you say, and who will promise to look after this child and see to it that the parents fulfill their responsibility, to see to it that this child is raised in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And the godfather and the godmother say, we do. And I'm reading through this thing because, I'm not paying attention. And I get that, and there's nobody there. And it was too late to back off. I had already gotten to the line of who will stand for this child. Should the parents not be able to take care of this child, to be sure that this child is raised in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? It was one of the most moving moments of my life. The congregation, sensing my predicament, about 80 people there, with one accord stood and said, we do. Whoa. That's the Church of Jesus Christ. That's the church I want to be a part of, that rushes in and says, we embrace you. We take care of you. We are your family. And when you don't have a family, you can count on us. That's the church that I believe in. That's the church that comes through very carefully in the Simpsons. It's a great church in this respect. The religion of the family, aside from Lisa, who is very, very into causes, into every cause that comes down the pike, is very much what we would call in sociology cultural religion. It's the religion of the culture. You don't get overly committed to Jesus Christ. You just go to church because that's what good people do, and you embrace a moral ethic. And let me just say, the difference between being a Christian and being an American is not distinguishable. I contend that most of the people that go to church on Sunday fall into that category. The reason why everybody's so critical of the Simpsons is because they are the Simpsons. They go to church, they sing the hymns, but it doesn't really impact their lives very much, aside from Lisa. It doesn't really impact them at all. They learn a few things, but they're rather cynical about the thing. Church is something you do. But the idea of Christ coming into your life, of transforming you, of having any kind of spiritual experience in which you feel the closeness of the Lord, the invasion of the Spirit. I preach every Sunday at a church, and I got to tell you, it's easy. I contend that the typical church is one of the greatest evangelistic fields that have ever come down the pike. You don't have to go outside the church to find people who need to come to know Jesus as personal Savior. Because they believe in God, they believe in religion, they believe in the ethic. But the idea of having a personal involvement with Christ, where Christ invades you, where you feel His presence. Now, I realize I'm in a Calvinistic school where you're not supposed to feel anything. It's the Methodists that are supposed to feel. I grew up Baptist, you know. I'm Baptist. The difference between a Baptist and a terrorist is that you can negotiate with a terrorist. You see, that's the difference. But the reality is, I grew up in this church, and I wanted to know Jesus. I heard these evangelists talking about having this personal relationship with Jesus and feeling this aliveness, this joy, this ecstasy of the Spirit, and I never felt anything. So, I went and asked the pastor, why don't I feel anything? And I can still hear him say, in true Calvinistic style, feeling is not important. You can't trust your feelings. You don't tell an Italian, don't trust your feelings. But that's what he told me. You turn Dutch people, you can tell them not to trust their feelings. Don't mess around with Italians. I said, what am I supposed to trust? He said, trust the Bible, trust the Word of God. Do you believe in Jesus? Yes. Do you believe He died on the cross for your sins? Yes. Then you're saved. I said, but I don't feel anything. I don't have any experience with Jesus. Don't trust feelings. Trust the Bible. The Bible says that whosoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Do you believe in Him? Yeah, I believe in Him. Do you believe the Bible? Yeah. Do you believe that there's a Jesus that died on the cross for your sins? Yeah. Then you're saved. Forget about feeling anything. Sorry, it didn't cut it with me. I ask no dream, no prophet's ecstasy. But I do want an experience that will, in the words of the old hymn, take the deadness of my soul away. I want the Wesley experience. Wesley, who, as a burnout man like Reverend Lovejoy, wanders into a prayer meeting on Aldersgate Street, sits down in this Moravian prayer meeting, and the next day writes in his journal, and suddenly my heart was strangely warmed. And I knew. That's what I want. I want my heart to be warm. I want that inner sense of assurance. I want that certainty that comes from within. In the words of Blaise Pascal, the heart can have reasons that reason will never know. Good line. That's what I'm into. Of course, Blaise Pascal was one of my people. Goes into a dark room, closes the door. See, Calvinists go on retreats. And they tell you in summer camp to take your Bible and go out on the hillside and meditate for our morning devotions. Didn't they tell you to do this? Bad idea. Nature is incredibly seductive. And the reality is that you will get so caught up with nature, you'll forget everything religious. That's inevitable. I assure you that's the case. The reality is this. The reality is that Jesus had it right. When you pray, go into the closet and shut the door. And the God that you meet in secret will reward you openly. When you go into a closet and shut the door, guess what it is? Dark, no distractions. And when I pray, I make sure to be in a place where it's dark and there are no distractions. And I center down on Christ. And I drive everything else out of my consciousness. They asked Mother Teresa once, when you pray, what do you say to God? She said, I don't say anything, I listen. So Dan Rather said, all right. When you pray, what does God say to you? She said, God doesn't say anything. God listens. And then she said, if you don't understand that, I can't explain it to you. I do understand it. I do understand what happens in stillness when you are in that thin place, as the Celtic Christians call it, and you sense the presence of the Lord. You are like Isaiah in the 5th chapter. I went into the temple and suddenly what? It wasn't just another religious meeting. Suddenly there was the Lord high and lifted up. I sensed his presence in a mystical way. I long for that. The truth is that none of that exists in this family. There is no mysticism. Most religious person is Lisa, and she has a social gospel. And I have a social gospel, but it's a social gospel empowered by a spirituality that comes from a personal experience with Christ. Blaise Pascal, who sits in the room still in the darkness, from 7 o'clock on, the next day he writes in his diary, 10:30 p.m., fire, fire, fire. Not the God of the philosophers, not the God of the mathematicians, not the God of the theologians or the scientists, but the God that was alive in Abraham, Moses, and Jacob. Fire, fire, fire. Joy, joy, joy. Fire, joy, 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 joy. Incredible joy. That's what I want. That's what spirituality is at its peak for me. Believing is important, don't get me wrong. My salvation is not depending on my experiences. It's dependent on what Jesus did on the cross for me. I agree with that Calvinistic stuff. I just say, I want something more. In politics, the political satire is wonderful. The mayor of the town is Mayor Quimbley, who is obviously a Democrat. Not only is he a Democrat, but when you hear him speak, he speaks just like Ted Kennedy. I mean, he speaks just like Ted Kennedy. And in case you think that they're just picking on Democrats, may I point out the Republicans also appear in the show with great regularity, and they are even more sinister. There is one called Bob, what is it? Bob Showboat or something. What is it? Sideshow Bob. That's it. Sideshow Bob. Yeah, and of course, if you look at him and you hear him talk, you'll realize he talks just like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, here he is, this Hollywood-type personality. And because of Quigley, who is corrupt, steals some of the money from the town lottery and is driven out of town, there's this incredible situation where they take over. Democrats are depicted as corrupt. Republicans are depicted as sinister. They are people who want to control the society for selfish means. Republicans are much more venial. They just want money. Democrats just want money. Republicans want power. Mayor Quimbley, the Democrat, buys votes at election time. The Republicans don't buy votes. They steal elections by changing voting machines, by going over voting cards with hanging chads. You begin to sense that, you're getting in the Democrats, the Chicago machine. of corrupt politicians, of buying votes, of the dead voting. You get that image. On the Republican side, you get this manipulation of the system for their own. Matt Groening, who I know personally, said, my view of politics is simply this, that I distrust all politicians on both parties. And I find that politicians serve their own interests. They really can't be depended upon to serve the interests of the general family. Incidentally, everything is family oriented. So the only issues that are raised about politics is how politics affects the family, how religion affects the family. Everything is family oriented. Once again, it's a family show. And now I don't agree with Matt Groening. I think that there are many politicians who are in it for very, very lofty reasons and are attempting to do good for society. And there are more of them than I think there are of the bad people. So I don't have that negative view of politicians. And I assure you, I know many, many politicians up close. As a matter of fact, I know Clinton probably as much as anybody outside of his wife knows him. And maybe I even know him better than that. I know that these people have flaws, they have shortcomings. Bush has flaws, he has shortcomings. But having said that, I think that both Bush and Clinton have this in common. Both of them, even though they have different worldviews, different policies, and each party will look at the other as the incarnation of evil, each of these men I know to be good people, trying to do what they think is best. Learn to critique policies and not condemn people. Because I think that if you could get to know these people, I had a very negative attitude towards Bush because, you know, I'm a Democrat, and as the years have gone by, he seems to get more and more popular, and I don't like it. And I went down, I was asked by Bill Clinton to deliver the dedicatory prayer at the opening of the Clinton Library. Well, this was a big deal, you know. I'm up on a platform, and myself with four presidents, Jimmy Carter, the first George Bush, the present president, and Bill Clinton, and they all gave little speeches and all of that. And it's pouring rain. I mean, it is pouring. And I come, after the thing's over, we walk off the platform into the library itself, and I'm dripping wet because I'm the last thing in the program. And so I'm out there, and everybody else has got umbrellas up, but I don't. And I'm pouring. It's buckets. And I come in, and I'm just standing there like this, drenched. And nobody's help comes near me. All of a sudden, there's somebody running around, grabbing handkerchiefs, and he's knocking water off my back, and I turned around, and he's blotting out water all over me, and it's George Bush. And you know, all of a sudden, here's this President of the United States that I have all of these antagonisms toward, demonstrating that as a person, he's a very thoughtful person, very thoughtful person. And he's concerned about me, and you're going to be all right. Gee, that was terrible out there. I love the prayer, and you know, he loved the prayer. I talked about those who make war without considering the price. You know, I mean, you know, when you get to know these people, I contend that I think it's all too easy for the sophomoric mind to become cynical about politicians and to write them off, because I have found them, for the most part, to be people who try to do right. That doesn't mean they always do right, nor does it mean that there aren't politicians who are evil. All those things are true. Now let's get to the philosophical dimensions. Yes, philosophy is dealt with in depth. Let's take Plato's Republic, which is dealt with in depth. In depth. I think you could have a whole philosophy class on the show, I think it's called Lisa Gets Back Her Mind or something like that. What was the name of that show? Does anybody remember? In it, Lisa writes an editorial, an elitist intellectual editorial for the town paper. In it, she condemns Springfield, her town. She complains. There's no symphony orchestra in Springfield. There are 32 bars, 8 malls, and no alternative theater. Be this as it may, some of the bright people of town read this letter to the editor and sense that Lisa is very bright. They ask her to come and meet with them, and it's Mensa. I guess you know what Mensa is. And they ask Lisa to join Mensa, and she does, and because she's very, very bright, this is an organization that was started by Buckminster Fuller. in which you have to have an IQ of 160 in order to join. So they test you, and then you can become a member. And what, in fact, Mensa suggested, what Buckminster Fuller suggested, is that Mensa people should only marry Mensa people. In other words, there should be selective breeding, because we're letting the idiots have children instead of brilliant people. This is Mensa. Is this elitist? So she joins the group, and then, as I said earlier, the mayor gets run out of town, and by a quirk in the town charter, this little group of intellectuals take over. The philosopher king of Plato has become a reality. The intellectuals now control the society. And indeed, they do make some improvements in traffic patterns and some very necessary things that need to be done in the town. But in the end, they have an argument. For one group wants Springfield to be patterned after Plato's Republic, and the other group wants it patterned after B.F. Skinner's Walden II. Once again, if you're not acquainted with philosophy, and if you don't know anything about modern philosophical psychology, you're at a loss. You don't know what's going on here. But this is a very sophisticated thing. If you let the elitists get in charge, they end up fighting with each other. To settle the argument, guess who arrives? Stephen Hawking, the brightest man in the world. And they all start fighting and squabbling, and here's what he says at one point. Sometimes, says Stephen Hawking, sometimes the smartest of us can be most childish. Sometimes the smartest of us can be most childish. And indeed, they are reduced to childlike behavior, childish behavior. It ends up that they establish a very repressive society, and they want to regulate breeding. And they want breeding to take place only once in every 7 years, as is the case on the Vulcans in Star Trek. Now, once again, if you don't know anything about Star Trek, you don't know, and the subtlety of Star Trek is so great. The one voice speaks up, and he's got the exact accent of Scotty in Star Trek. Once again, if you don't know popular culture, Simpsons will just fly by you. And he says, we cannot do it, Captain. We cannot do it. We do not have the power. We do not have the power in our engines. You know, she's great. In any event, there is a rebellion. And here's the thing. Homer leads the rebellion. It's the rebellion of the idiots, he calls it. He says, come on, you idiots. We're going to take back our town. And everybody gathers behind him, and the idiots, the common people, take back the town and restore it to sanity. The last scene is a wonderful one, where Stephen Hawking and Homer are down at Moe's bar drinking beer, eating donuts together, as Homer is explaining to Stephen Hawking his concept of the donut-shaped universe. Once again, you'd have to know Hawking. And Hawking is saying, because Hawking, of course, does come up with this idea. And in this thing, it's like, you know, Hawking is getting this brilliant insight from Homer. Well, the point is very simple, and it is this. It's a theme that comes out of Dostoevsky's novel, Brothers Karamazov, which is this, that those intellectual elitists end up with the ultimate crime. In Nietzsche, he doesn't believe in God. In the myth of the Grand Inquisitor, Ivan does not believe in God. And the real sin of atheism, as in fact we learn so quickly from Dostoevsky, that not believing in God is not the great tragedy, because God can handle it. The problem is that people who are atheists, who are intellectual elitists, and are atheists because of it, not only disbelieve in God, but they don't believe in common people. They don't believe in ordinary people. They don't believe that ordinary people have the capacity to make decisions. Last night I was in Texas, and I was driven to the airport by a pastor who said, you're from the Northeast? He said, yeah. I said, you know, you eggheads up there, you think we're all stupid, don't you? Anybody that lives in Plainview, Texas, what do you say? And he said, we're not stupid. And you know, that's right. There is this elitist mindset, this Northeast snottiness. And, you know, there's almost this attitude about Bush that he's stupid. And he's not. Bill Clinton, he ought to know, who's had many conversations with Bush, says Bush is very, very bright. And he's going to beat the Democrats every time because he blindsides them because they don't realize how bright he is. He will outmaneuver them because they don't think he's smart. That's why Clinton was probably one of the most clever presidents we ever had. He was able to read a situation. And he said every time he mispronounces a word, you know what happens? 90% of America says, that's me. Whenever he can't pronounce some Arab sheik's name, every American who goes to NASCAR says, that's me. And what you don't realize is that he has an incredible, and as Clinton said, I sometimes wonder whether all those Bushisms aren't deliberately chosen, because this man graduated from Yale and has an MBA from Harvard. And yet he conceals all of that. He's one of the boys. He's one of the boys. He's one of the down-home people. You got to look at these things. Well, let's just look at this whole thing of the contempt for the common man that emerges in elitism. And what is wrong with Plato's Republic is it doesn't have confidence in ordinary people. What's wrong with Ivan and Brothers Karamazov is he doesn't believe in ordinary people. Ordinary people have a great capacity. As Winston Churchill said once, the American people can always be trusted to make the right decisions after they have exhausted all the other options. But I got to tell you, there is something about the common people of America that is really quite wonderful. And the Democrats lost this election, and they deserve to lose it. Not just because of their position on issues, because I happen to agree with most of their issues. There was a contempt for the common man. There was a contempt for middle America. They laughed at evangelicals, and they got exactly from us what they deserved: rejection. You reject us, we'll let you know about it at the ballot box. With Lisa, you have the existentialist who lives according to principles, who lives according to the concept of right. She refuses to conform to the expectations of society. And she is sad. And as you know, Lisa plays what instrument? The saxophone. And she wails with the saxophone. And this is the way she works out her sadness. Her mother, in fact, plays the Pollyanna game. Lisa, if you just smile all the time, you'll be popular. The boys will like you. Lisa, who never has a date, finally does what the mother says. It's not her. She forces a smile, and she goes around school smiling all day. And sure enough, the kids do like her. And sure enough, the boys start wanting to date her. And everything's going well, except that it's not who she is. And in the end, the mother says, you be sad all you want, Lisa. And when you come out of it, we'll be waiting here for you. Oh, that's a great family. You be sad all you want, and when you come out of it, we'll be waiting here for you. I got to tell you, they do a better job of the family than the Harry Potter stories do. So I just need to make that point. Okay. Just a couple of other things that I need to press. There's a great theme on happiness. It's a great theme in which Satan, this episode, let me just say, in sophistication, this is a strong statement, this episode with Satan transcends the profundity of C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, by far, or the Screwtape Letters, by far. Let me tell you what the temptation of Satan is. Satan incarnates himself for a little while and tries to make out with this woman who rejects him, so he's mad. And he's really angry. He calls all the devils and principalities and powers together, and he says, how are we going to get humanity to sin? Oh no, that's too easy. It's more profound than that. What are we doing to dehumanize the human race? We're not talking about sin, we're talking about dehumanization. And in the end, sin is breaking a rule. Sin is offending God. There's something more sinister here. How do we dehumanize people? And he calls in all the devils, and they talk about lust, and they talk about sex, and they talk about money and materialism and all. None of it works. Finally, this little devil who's just come along makes the final and ultimate suggestion. He said, spiritualize things. What do you mean? Well, let's look at the ads on television, because that's the ultimate satanic seduction. There's a beer ad. These guys are fishing and they're cooking fish over a skillet. It's eventide. A harmonious voice sings in a deep voice. Here's to good friends. Tonight is kind of special. It's got an upper room quality to it. The guy reaches out, pulls off a can of beer, pulls off the tab, holds up the can of beer and says, you know, guys, it doesn't get any better than this. We're talking about a can of beer. Or are we? Aren't we really talking about the whole context of the beer? What is being sold here is friendship, well-being, a bucolic vision of reality. The subtlety is that if you buy the ad, you'll never enjoy the beer. The beer will always disappoint you, because the beer in the ad symbolized something other than the beer, and it didn't deliver what it symbolized. Agreed? The most famous ad on television. Think of it, the most famous ad of all time. They're on top of a hill. They're from every nation on the face of the earth. Blacks and whites from South Africa, they're holding hands. People in every native costume represented. Catholics and Protestants singing together. Going to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Note, the division of humanity from Babel has been overcome. Humanity has been unified. Once again, brotherhood and sisterhood has become a reality. Indeed, the whole fall has been overcome. Going to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. And what is it that brings perfect harmony to broken humanity? What is it that restores humanity to its wholesome state? What's the word? Coca-Cola. And just when you say it isn't real, the voice says, what? It's the real thing. Just note, what happens is that everything that is sold to us in our culture always represents something else. Now, if you've taken a course in philosophy, you know there's two kinds of good. There's intrinsic good, and there's instrumental good. Intrinsic good is when things are good in and of themselves. Instrumental good is when it's good because it points to something else. What has happened in our society is that everything has become instrumentally good. Thus, Satan actually encourages ministers to preach against materialism, because that's not the problem. The problem is is that people have things and don't really enjoy them. The ultimate sense of alienation, that when I got all the stuff that I could possibly want, none of it brings me any joy, because I do not know how to enjoy things in and of themselves. Rabbi Herschel once said, on Judgment Day, we shall all be judged for the ordinary things that we might have enjoyed and did not, because they always were associated with something more important. I remember one day I was sick, and I had to stay in bed. It was a Saturday morning, and I turned on the television. There was nothing to watch except for Mr. Rogers. And just out of curiosity, I kept the television on. And he said, boys and girls, we're going to fill a fishbowl. And he took glasses of water and started pouring them into the fishbowl. And as he did this slowly, I stood there, and it took me a moment to realize what had happened. I was going, wow, he's filling the fishbowl. Mr. Rogers took the ordinary and made it so special that it took on a quality of the holy. There is something wrong with us when, in fact, ordinary things cannot be enjoyed in and of themselves. Consider the lilies of the valley. And don't think that they symbolize something else. Just consider the lilies of the valley. Enjoy it. Or, as Emily says in Thornton Wilder's play, Our Town, do any of you really ever enjoy the ordinary things of life while you're living? Well, that's my case for the most part. I've tried to make the case that the Simpsons represent family life at its best. Maybe not as it should be, but probably the best that America has to offer. It demonstrates loyalty. It explores deep philosophical concepts. It explores religious dimensions of life in ways that no other show does. And those people who say that it's evil are saying something, but I contend it's more of a confession. It's more of a confession than anything else. When they say it's evil, they're not so much accusing the Simpsons. They're confessing to the fact that they don't know how to read the contemporary culture. And they haven't explored the deeper dimensions of spirituality and well-being. Let me stop there. It's just about 8 o'clock. I've been going for an hour exactly, and I intended to do that. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. For one more philosophical concept, Maggie, the little baby, doesn't speak. But in these shows, over and over again, Wittgenstein's philosophy is raised. I kid you not. The question is, can we think without words? That was the real question of Wittgenstein in the whole development of the logical positive school of philosophy. Do we think in words? And if you do not have words, can you think? Are words the categories of apperception? Does Maggie think? The answer, of course, is yes. And there is a crossover here to Eastern philosophy. For in the Eastern thought, the philosophers say, those who know cannot say, and those who say do not know. Quietude, says Heidegger. Silence is the way in which we become authentic personalities. The question, and I won't explore it anymore here, is Maggie in her silence becoming an authentic person in the midst of the insanity of the situation? One thing last in closing. If Marge was here, if Lisa was here, Lisa would make this plea. You claim to be Christians. If you're Christians, you'll do something tonight. I don't know whether you're supporting a child in a third world country. But for $32 a month, you can feed, you can clothe, you can educate, you can evangelize a child in a third world country. In the end, Christianity is not a lot of elitist thinking. In the end, Christianity is measured in terms of what you do to the least of the brothers and the sisters. On Judgment Day, you will not be asked theological questions. I wish you were. I wish I was. I wish they'd ask me on Judgment Day. Campolo, before we let you in, virgin birth, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, check one. I'd score an A. That's not the question. Here's the questions. I was hungry, did you feed me? I was naked, did you clothe me? I was sick, did you care for me? Hey gang, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a kid standing next to you on Judgment Day? So when the Lord says, I was hungry, did you feed me? Naked, did you clothe me? You could hit the kid and say, tell him. Because if there is such a child, the Lord will say, enter ye into the kingdom. I was in Africa this year. I was in Harare. There are 13 million orphan kids in Africa. 13 million. In Harare, there's about 10,000 orphan kids. About 500 of them live on the streets. Victims of the AIDS crisis. Many of them have AIDS themselves. I saw the truck that comes through at 6:30 in the morning. They told me about it, and I got up early to see it. I followed it as it went slowly up and down the streets of Harare, picking up the corpses of children who had died during the night. And they picked up 7 dead kids. And the truck drove to the field behind the Sheraton Hotel and put them in a pile and set fire to them and burned them. And they burn them there every day. And that shouldn't happen. I've been in Thailand. I've seen 13-year-old girls who are prostitutes because it's the only way that they can support their families. That shouldn't happen. I was in a village in South Africa where the oldest person was 18 because everybody older than that had died of AIDS. And every day, taxi cabs come into that village and say to the girls that are 16 and 17 and 18, come work with us. If you want to feed your brothers and sisters, if you don't want them to die, you better come and work for us, and there is no other work. And you may find that abominable, but I say there's something noble about a 17-year-old girl that'll let some filthy old slob drool all over her naked body in order to feed her brothers and sisters. I went down and visited them all. And they live in shacks, and their lives are abominable except for the fact that they eat, and they go to school, and they get medical care, and they get to know about Jesus. And that ain't a bad thing to do with your life. On that note, thank you very much for your attention. This is the first and only time I have ever spoken on The Simpsons. So thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you especially Tony. He'll be appearing on Intercompass later on tonight. Oh, and next month Matt Groening will be speaking at the same time, same place.